I'm not really getting the impression outside of our really august institutions like Cambridge, Oxford, St Andrews, and the like. I think for the most part, a lot of our universities are effectively just going down the progressive route. And
Hmm.
if you go on, in fact, I was going on a couple of university websites the other day because I was interested in some of the universities I saw that were in the periphery of my London office. I don't live in London. I actually live up in Edinburgh in Scotland. When I go down to London,
Mm.
I noticed over these universities and I thought, well, I've never really heard of these before. And there are so many like that. And when you go on the website, it's the usual page all about diversity, Black History Month, those kind of things. And there seems to be not a lot of majoring on those courses of substance, as it were. But this
Mm.
language you were talking about, this cultural language, which you say you can understand when you start to read the classics, you'll start to see it within art and literature. I also, to draw an analogy from my time in London, you see where the story breaks off in our architectural stock, as it were. So
Mm.
I see it all the time, and I always look out for it now. But I
Mm.
am in one of those very new modern buildings in central London near Liverpool Street, so the City of London. And when you look out of that window, down at a much lower level, but probably high for the time, you have all of these beautiful buildings in a vernacular architecture style, whether neo-Gothic or Edwardian, and they still have that language you're talking about. Either you can see a figure of Apollo or Atlas,
Mm.
or on some corners you can see the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child.
Mm.
But flanking them are these huge, featureless monoliths of glass
Yeah.
and steel, occasionally jutting out. And it seems to me like, in the Men in Black, when they will they'll do the memory erasure, and
Yeah.
then it's like
Yeah.
nothing ever
Yeah.
happened before. It feels like there was an architectural periods, probably the 50s, the 60s, the 60s, I would have thought, where that happened. And everything that's
Mm.
built afterwards, there is nothing. There's no common language. And the thing is I used to walk around and notice the detail, but not know what it was.
Mm.
Didn't pay attention to it, wondered why it was there. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until I started to access this rich tradition that I started to understand and then realize that it was bequeathed by a certain person who also had links to this person over here. And then they were deep believers in the Christian story or otherwise. And the architectural landscape of our major cities, the Americas the same, they're so impoverished now. And they're quite
Mm.
dispiriting places to be in. You could be anywhere when you're walking through them. It just doesn't. There are large parts of London you can walk through, and you're no longer in the
Yeah.
capital of England.
Yeah. That Men in Black metaphor is very haunting. I think that's right. Like, there's a quote that I love to return to by the paleontologist G.G. Simpson that basically everything before Darwin, he says, was worthless and would be best if we forgot it and started again, especially on the subjects of mankind, what we are, where we came from, where we're going, because we have a new story about that. And that's the attitude that motivates a lot of what we've been talking about today. I think it's that that we need liberation from something, and that something is usually something baked into the structure of reality itself. So it's liberation from the past, it's liberation from oppressive beauty standards, it's liberation from right and wrong, it's liberation from true and false. And Milton's great theme in Paradise Lost, actually, is that liberation at that scale, liberation from all strictures, including those that are definitional, that simply are by virtue of the structure of existence, is hell, is to you have no choice but to constantly remake the universe and yourself in the image of deeper and deeper misery. And I don't think that's like, there's a lot to lay at the feet of a couple ugly skyscrapers, but the impulse is on display everywhere. And I spent some time last year, I think it was, in Budapest, which is really noteworthy for this very phenomenon, for the architectural kind of periods that are visible in the landscape of the city. One reason for which is that if you can think of a conquering power in world history, the Hungarians have been conquered by that power. There is almost no oppressive autocratic regime that has not rolled through and over the Magyars, and they remain now still the Hungarians, and they have this incredibly embattled and beleaguered country. And of course, this includes having gone through a period of Soviet rule. And Soviet rule really was the ultimate expression of this impulse to start again at year zero. You see it elsewhere. You see it in the French Revolution with the attempt to restart time and rebuild the calendar, but it's in Soviet ideology that this becomes explicit and becomes a philosophy unto itself. It's not just a consequence of some other set of ideas. It is the idea of Soviet ideology that we are making the new man and making the new world along with him. And so, yes, you see it. You see it just like totally axed and razed to the ground. And it's very easy when you start talking about this stuff to get into a sort of this is what they took from us antiquarian mentality, and to want to say that therefore every building should be built with fluted columns and have sculptures of the classical gods. And, I might enjoy that, but I actually think it would be a mistake. And it's something that it's an aesthetic mistake that conservatives are prone to. That the answer to this problem, I think, is not, certainly it is to recover and preserve our heritage, but not to attempt to recreate the material particulars of our heritage. It's actually a form of idolatry. It's actually a form of confusing the ways in which these attitudes and ideas have been expressed in the past with the ways in which we in the nuclear age and the digital age ought to be expressing them. And there are better ways, I think, of doing this. In Budapest, one of my favorite phenomena is it's called the ruin bar. And it's when young people and artists have taken these destroyed industrial wasteland landscapes of the Soviet period and turned them into these kind of riotous Mardi Gras dive bars. And you wouldn't think of that exactly as a classicizing impulse. You wouldn't call it that, I don't think. It's not right to say that's conservative or anything of that nature, but it is restorative. That is, it takes the reality of the city as it is, including its scars from the periods of conquest, and says, how can the spirit of life, which ultimately is the spirit that motivates the classical virtues and so forth, recolonize this area and this location? And whenever I see, a digital aesthetic that kind of speaks to me in that way, I make a little like bookmark or note of it, just because I think, we are struggling with this right now, what it looks like to embody all of these virtues and ideals in the present. But that is kind of our task, I think, is like, we're going to have to retain our patrimony and our inheritance while also like undoing some of our historical mistakes without traveling backward into the past. We're looking, I think, now for a way forward that is traditional, but also, hyper modern. And it is possible, I have a friend, Emmett Penny, who is fascinated and really knowledgeable about nuclear power, and he designs nuclear power plant cathedrals just because he thinks like, what would it be like, to kind of take the exigencies of modern technology and like feed them into the true, the good, and the beautiful. And we don't even think in those terms. We have this like automatic kind of utilitarian impulse that just, executes whatever task we have without any sort of imperative for beauty. Beauty is not kind of like a good in itself that needs incorporating into our projects, in our mindset. And that's, I think, maybe the thing that really needs to change.